Good day, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of Mindful Drawing. Today, we're going to have a little bit of free space to play around the page. Not that every week isn't a bit of playing as we're having fun just drawing and letting our mindfulness flow through the marks on the page, but here is going to bring in some doodling. How do we begin? By just putting that pencil down onto the paper and letting it flow around and finding spaces within it to explore. We'll work to connect those spaces with our breath, with our actions, with our senses, as we dive deep inside the body to open up a space and just melt our background noise away, smooth out into a calm puddle so that we can reorganize and come back prepared to engage with our day or wind down for some restful sleep in the evening. So grab your pencil, your pen, your favorite piece of paper, a sketchbook, or even just the back of a note card, and let's draw together. Instead of a warm-up, maybe just to doodle a lot, or just to kind of draw, play around. And what I would do is, I'm a very prolific doodler. All of my notes and pages get filled up. I can't even read them anymore, but it helps me pay attention and focus. So talk through some of it, combining a lot of different techniques and ways of working with the body and the page that we've done in many of the sessions, just to have some free space on the page to explore and draw and see where it goes. But I find often when I'm on a piece of paper, and especially taking notes in a meeting or something like that, that to fill the time between stuff I need to know, I start to just draw some curves somewhere, let some kind of shape that feels nice with the hand move out across the page, and whatever that ends up being for me, whether it's a zigzag or an arc or something like that, take that as a starting point to begin to build out regions, maybe with reciprocal or pairing shapes that just start to wrap around each other and fill out parts of the page, sometimes with the ability to squeeze in and out between other places, whether that's lines in a notebook or text or the previous layer of the drawing, and just using the first few marks to establish some territory around the page, give myself that space to begin letting my eyes connect in with some of the shapes or forms or figures that my hand is interested in creating that day, that the forming of these shapes is something probably over many years that's just felt its way into the muscles of my hand, with a few kind of parallel or contrary wrappings, filling out a little bit more area, and then coming back into them and starting to play around a bit with how they connect to one another. If they have open ends, sometimes just giving them a little wrapping, or maybe little puzzle piece that starts to tie them in or lets them fold back on themselves. Wrap some of the open, empty space of the page, and then begin to close off a few regions that open up for me new canvases to play in, so that not every part of the drawing has to make sense with the next, but that these little zones can become their own areas for exploring through crafting marks. Always come and bounce around a little bit of what is open and closed without procedure. I'm starting to look into these and building off of their curves, letting the hand kind of track them a few times, maybe thickening or just extending into the empty space of the paper, wrapping from an established mark or curve, and allowing that to make its new own position there in the page. A thickening of some of those initial gestures to explore what weight they might gain on the page as they introduce a bit of figure or ground, depending on which way you want to look at it, some light and dark in between the zones. And often I find a bit of a technique or something that I can repeat without too much intention or thinking to it, just kind of that flowing along a curve, and in this case leaking into the space, then going back to the curve to make little pockets around themselves. Continuing to play around in the doodle with that technique. Trusting that in finding a way of drawing or a way of making a mark on the page, that I then can follow it through without having to constantly adjust or bring my attention out to the full aspect of the drawing, just to be local in one of these spaces or regions that I've created through my hand. And of having some time to savor the feeling within one small region of a mark of how, in this case, the graphite can glide with variability off of its place in the stick that it comes on to a fine ground-in dusting on the page, to feel the silkiness that builds up as these forms wrap around one another, begin to bring intensity or emergence to the interior void space. And each little swoop, working my way, massaging into it, a little back and forth, letting that material from the pen or the pencil, the ink or the graphite, fill into these new voids. Layering these kind of successive marks, figures, not rushing to fill the space, but letting the movement of the hand find a way to accumulate layers of material. And that way, if we move a little bit outside of a line, our eye catches that, and we begin to bring our attention to it, we just keep drawing in the same way, layering a little bit more dark over the light to cover what may draw our attention as a mistake or a mark that glares or stands out, and let it slowly just fade into the intensities forming in the drawing. Sometimes the edges begin to get a little fuzzy or dirty, and can always come back along and kind of paint them together with soft marks, and in that maybe find the transition from one zone to the next as the fingers want to explore and move their way out across the page. A good opportunity to bring that mindful attention to how those fingers are engaging with the pencil or pen. Here with a fairly heavy pencil, maybe weight-wise. The metal has a lot of resistance to it. My fingers have to hold a little tighter to keep it from wanting to roll out of my hand as gravity pulls on the pencil. Feeling the pressure on the tips of my fingers as I paint or leak this graphite out into the page. And seeing if I can maybe bring a little more looseness or suppleness to that, as the tightness is a reaction to a feeling of needing to hold on to the implement. And maybe I don't need to draw so hard. I just let gravity work with my fingers and find its way to a balance in my hand. How does that change the way I'm drawing? For me, it's making it a bit lighter, but also a bit softer, some little smoother movements to my hand, feeling that pressure relieved a bit from my fingertips that I was pressing so hard to get the darkness in other areas. And I know that if I want to return to that intensity of value, I can begin to increase pressure, but from now a more intentional or mindful point of view, in that I'm aware of the connection between the pencil and my fingers, and my attention goes into that space and out of other places in my mind, opens up some regions to loosen and relax, using the very tactile physical act to practice a bit of release, bringing attention to places of tension, and then making slight adjustments so that they soften, smooth out, and let us flow a bit in the state of these mediums of visual expression. And a lot of this for me happens very, very quickly when just doodling in a page, or if there's noise around in an environment of daily work. But here, having a little bit more time and a little bit more space to enjoy each moment of the act, rather than as a distraction, but as some expression of creation, I can take my time a little more. Not move the pencil or pen so quickly. Perhaps take some moments to bring it into awareness with other parts of my body. The breath is always a good place to begin, and work through some of the other senses once you've established a rhythm from the breath. So here in shifting a technique, perhaps from my position, or just the hand is interested in, starting to bring those in-breaths and out-breaths into the action of the drawing, to check in and see if we're holding any tension there in our diaphragm. Perhaps breathe in on a stroke, and for the way I'm drawing, I'm going to breathe out, returning on the same general trajectory as a way of establishing a curve, and then thickening it, embedding it into the page. Making a new mark with the fresh infiltration of air. and then establishing it with that heavy release from those ever active muscles there in the diaphragm and the connection to our rib cage, mid back and lower back, our abdomen, the rising and lowering of the sternum. Just a few rounds of a little bit deeper breathing to help us have attention on it. Bring a bit more oxygen into the lungs. You might feel the head get a little bit lighter, hopefully not lightheaded, but just a little lighter from the increased oxygenation of the blood. Feel the blood vessels, capillaries opening up, allowing a bit more flow to the system, the body hungry for oxygen, the lungs bringing it in, distributing it, and that increased oxygenation can stay with us for a while throughout the day, but right now just brings repair and healing to many of the muscles, many of the tissues that have been working hard and engaging in thought and action, letting them drink deeply from the air around us and transfer some of that energy within the chemicals of oxygen, nitrogen, back out through our pen, through the muscles of our arm and shoulder, wrist and hand, the fine pressures of our fingers, back to this page. The influences of what surrounds us, space, that we begin to take up a little more of as we expand, and then contract into a more relaxed state, letting the awareness also flatten out and sink from a ball or multi-directional knot that is always trying to scan and interpret, to place itself within the environment. And it just sinks with the breath into maybe a little puddle. Often on subway rides or in preparation for presentations or meetings, and take a few moments, sometimes with a piece of paper if it's handy, or just to breathe and do a little of that visualization of taking all the variable attentions, the jumping mind, the keeping track ofs, and just for a few moments let it all melt down into one little puddle with soft edges that flow out to wherever they lie, and give the combination of oxygen and hydrogen a chance to organize, to realign, to bring some new external awareness or detachment to what might be holding my attention. And let that breath just keep it in a gentle state of not quite formed. For me, the doodling is an external formation, something that can take the place of what might be emerging for attention, or even fighting for attention within my mind as the forms that the hand creates and the eye observes give me a bit of detachment from those internal formations, giving the mind time to organize and process those a little bit more. Just to have a little bit of distance, a little bit of space from acts of decision, expression. And in a mindful practice of that's meditation, drawing, breath work, yoga, there are many ways into it that we're giving ourselves a little space. Perhaps it's an asking of space from the environment around us, or an establishing of space that we need to gather and think clearly or just relax. Perhaps a holding of space so we can have patience and calm, a bit of compassion for others in our daily activities. We can just take a few moments of deep breathing before acting. Many times we can find our way to a considered, more mindful engagement with what's going on around us. And for me, the pull of the pencil and the very subtle adjustments that the eye and the pattern brain want to contribute to the moment of drawing help me establish that space for myself. I think within this, bringing a round of attention now that the breathing begins to sink into a more natural rhythm, balancing the intake of oxygen with the expulsion of carbon dioxide. Not too much to make our heady feeling overbearing, but not so little that we forget to breathe. We can bring attention to some of the other senses. Since the eyes are so engaged, often in a visual medium like drawing here, if I bring my awareness to the eyes and just try to fully open them, let them defocus, perhaps pick a spot on the page, or even just track only the very tip of the pencil to where the narrow focus becomes broad and expands to a somewhat blurry seeing of all the things in front of us, of taking in through the sense and opening up of the visual portal from the outside world to our inside world, until we don't see what we are doing, but just see. Take a couple breaths in that space of slightly blurry or softer vision as you continue to just keep the hand and the body in motion. And then we can bring our attention around to the hearing, the ears, and the sense of vibration and balance within our environment. And while you draw, listening, perhaps because it is there, the subtle inflections of my voice, or for me, the background, the very, very light sounds, a fan, a refrigerator, cars on the street outside, perhaps some hum or static from the electronics that surround us, birds playing in the morning, the wind rustling the trees outside the window. The most subtle sounds that can come to the foreground and go beyond the more obvious ones. And take a couple of breaths, again, opening that sense to allow in the subtle and the very overt, the loud and the quiet. Bring to the smell, the nose as each of these relaxing breaths passes in over the olfactory sensors, whether the smells of the morning, perhaps coffee or tea, perhaps the remnants of a breakfast, or the freshness of the windows being open to let the cooler air of night come in. Can you smell the paper that you're drawing on? Or water in the plants, slightly damp soil. And again, letting the nose open up to the very subtle smells and the very overpowering, both becoming foreground and background. For me, exploring the sense of taste without tasting things is always a bit of a deeper inward look, to let a bit of the air from the environment gently flow over the tongue. Does it have a taste? Do I taste the coffee in my mouth from earlier this morning? Perhaps there's still a mint or flavor from a toothpaste. Or maybe there's nothing. And letting your attention search through that space of taste. Such a strong interface that we have to experience enjoyment or disgust, depending on what it is. But also very subtle, difficult to qualify, even harder to quantify. We're kind of getting near the end of time, so for the last few moments, wherever you may be, bringing the final bit of attention just to sensation of touch. Could be back into the hand, or even using it as a bit of a wake up to feel where the body is. What position have you been in? Have things started to settle or perhaps cramp into that position? Can you move them around a little bit to loosen them up? Feel through everything from a light breeze on the hairs of your skin to the pressure of your feet on the floor or your seat in the chair. And as that brings us back a bit to the strong influences of the physical world, we can take a few breaths and wrap up our lines, knowing we can always return and keep exploring. And just bring a few deep breaths and opening to our awareness, ready to meet the day with all of our senses. I thank you all for joining. I hope you've had a good time here and are finding a bit of deep relaxation or just expression and creativity through each of these exercises. Please share this with your friends if you like it. Subscribe below to get new content each week. If you're interested in joining live, you can find these on Twitch at Rooks is Fun. They're every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. for about half an hour. And we just draw together and hopefully can experience a bit of shared open space and relaxation as we all have our creativity to let flow from our fingers and our minds through our bodies. If you create something interesting, tell us about it in the comments below, or share it on Instagram at Rooks is Fun, or just enjoy it and let it give you a peaceful start to the day so that you can bring creativity to everything you do. As always, draw well and see you next time. Thank you. Perhaps the perfect act of this mindful practice would be to let the drawing end where it ends, when the time is right and feels complete. And maybe that is here, me continuing to fill in just a few small areas untouched by the flow of my pencil yet. Or perhaps it is just ending, letting the drawing be what it is in whatever state it is.